Cool, the baby's Bible class can go off to their time together. I'm looking forward to be able to share a word that God's put on my heart for us as we continue with this series. It's great to have around 100 people in this auditorium, and those that are joining us online, please won't you interact and participate with us this morning. Well, a few weeks ago, as Milan said, I did a wedding, and that's where I ended up contracting the virus. And part of being a pastor is that we do these wedding ceremonies, which are great. I love doing wedding ceremonies. I love seeing that love in a couple. We always say it's easy to fall in love, but staying in love is the harder part, right? For those that have been married for a while, often the easy part is the falling in love, but the staying in love is sometimes a challenge. And someone said this: a successful relationship requires falling in love multiple times, but always with the same person. And for those that have been married for a while, you know the different seasons of love that you've had for your spouse. And you may even be in a place where your love for your spouse has become cold and distant. And there are times where you have to say, okay, we need to just re-fall in love. And we need to do those things we maybe did back in the day. We need to go on some dates, or we need to say some nice things to one another. We need to serve one another. But we want to trust that we can fall in love again. And John Aldridge said, falling in love with God is the most important thing a person can do. And just as we fall in love with the Lord and we have our first love with Him, staying in love with Him is something that can be a challenge for us. And I know that it is a challenge, and it's something on God's heart, because in Revelation, chapter 2, verse 4, He has this complaint against the church of Ephesus. Who knows what that complaint is? He says to the church of Ephesus in chapter 2, verse 4, "But I have this complaint against you. You don't love me or each other as you did first." Your first love has gone. You've lost your first love. So there is something about the desire that God has, not for us just to be passionately in love in the beginning and then for that love to grow cold and distant for Him and for each other. And my challenge is, if we got this complaint to New Creation Family Church, if the angel wrote a letter to us and said, New Creation Family Church, you do not love me the way you did in the beginning, and you've stopped loving each other the way you did in the beginning, what would we then do about that? What would we change? Just as a marriage may be struggling, the question would be in that relationship, well, what are you going to do now to fall in love again? And what would a local church have to do to say, how do we stoke those affections and passions for God so we can trust to see a deeper and more passionate love for Him? So I've been thinking about, what does a church in love with God look like? And I want you to think about that. If you were to describe a local church in love with God, what would that look like? What would that church prioritize? What would that church do with their time and their resources? How would they behave? What would their gatherings look like? And we've been on the series called Words to Live By, because I want us to get to a point where we're talking about this post-pandemic church, what this future church is going to look like. And I believe that God is doing a new thing. We're singing about God do a new thing with us, do a new thing in your church. We cannot go back to what was normal, but you are doing a new thing. And the question is, when we talk about this post-pandemic church, one of the things that we have to trust that we will be described as is a church that is deeply and madly in love with Jesus. And a church that is deeply and madly in love with Jesus, what would that look like? And we, for the last 3 weeks, so Gavin started off the sermon about what is the greatest commandment, and he looked at loving your neighbor as yourself. And then he had another opportunity to preach, and he spoke about who is your neighbor. And then Milan did such a great job last week in a practical way on how to love your neighbors, to treat them the way you want to be treated, or they deserve to be treated, with the golden rule. But I want to go back to the first part of that greatest command, and that is loving the Lord your God with all of your heart. So if you have your Bibles here, you can turn to Mark chapter 12, verse 28 to 33. This is the passage that Gavin started the series on, about these Sadducees and Pharisees that went to trip Jesus up with some loaded questions. And they go to him with the loaded question, and one of the scribes, who is a lawyer of the law. So we all know what a lawyer does. Sam, I'm still feeding. I don't know if you can turn me down a little bit. But this was a religious lawyer of the law that knew the law inside and out and came to test Jesus with a difficult question. And he goes to Jesus and he asks him this question: what commandment is the most important? So if we take the 613 laws of the Jews, the rabbis would often debate which is the heavier and which is the lighter one. Which are the heavier laws and which are the lighter ones? Meaning, which ones are more important? And Jesus answers and he says this: the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. So this is the first part of it, and then he throws in a second one, which Gavin then spoke about, which is, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. I guess the introverts would have been happy if he just gave the one answer, because they said, which is the most important? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the introverts would have been like, that's great. And then he says, I'm going to throw a bonus one in, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. And we've spent 3 weeks talking about what it means to love one another. And again, a sermon is another sermon. But what are we going to do differently? What are we going to put into practice? I hope you've taken that screensaver that Malign put on our social media this week, and it was a reminder for me, how do I do to others? How do I treat others differently? How do I love those around me? But most churches would take this greatest commandment and they would summarize it like this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. If you walk into most churches, this is their mission statement. It is there that says, love the Lord and love others. And maybe they throw a third one in, like do life together or have fun or advance his kingdom. But you would find these two things in a church's mission statement. So I've got a couple of questions that I want to unpack today. Is how do we love him more? And I want to just describe what I think this love looks like. So that question, what does a church in love with God look like? I decided to jot some things down that I think local churches love. Well, firstly, I would like to trust that a local church loves Jesus, the head of the church, the body loving the head. But who knows that we can walk in and we can say, the worship wasn't my playlist today, and it didn't quite do it for me. And actually, we can love ourselves and we can love things about local church, but not love Jesus. We can say we love one another, but actually we really just love ourselves. And a local church can say they love the lost, but someone comes in with all their baggage and their sin and their demons, and we say, no, that sort of person isn't really welcome in our holy gathering, our holy huddle. We don't want people like that with us. We can say we maybe love knowledge. We love head knowledge. We love a great sermon. Maybe we can say we love the gifts, or maybe, I don't know if we can say we love unity. Maybe we love our comfort and our safety. Tabiso is advertising prayer again. Does a church in love with God love those things that early church devoted themselves to? The apostles' teaching, fellowship, prayer, breaking of bread. I think in this modern world, we also have this love of a celebrity pastor. Maybe we love our buildings. What is it that the local church loves? What is it that we love as New Creation Family Church? And a church that is in love with God, what do? How do they behave? And I want us to dig a little bit deeper into this. So I took that a step further, because who is the church? Church is people. It's not just this weird institution in this building. So then I had to ask myself the question, well, what do I love? And maybe you can do this exercise. And I don't know, when you do lists, it can be quite revealing and limiting and difficult. So I decided to jot down, what do I love? Now, without putting God on this list just yet, I was like, I love my wife first. And then I love my boys, Josh and Sam. Now, I was doing some prep in bed yesterday morning, and they got to see this list. And my boys were a bit unhappy that they were number 2 and not on the same level as Maligned. So they said, why don't we move Josh and Sam up to the same level as Maligned and put our furry animals as number 2. But I've left dogs and animals off of this list. So I then put myself as number 3. And my thinking was this: if Milan or Josh or Sam needed a heart, I believe that I would be willing to lay my life down and give them my own heart. So I was like, well, I love them more than I'd be willing to love myself. But then Milan was quick to go like, but you also sit at number 1. Everyone loves themselves and loves their own needs. And so it's like, sometimes you need to show your wife these things when you're sitting there writing your own list. But I put Milan, Josh and Sam, myself, and then I put parents and my blood family, my relatives and my siblings. And then I put friends, and I put spiritual family, and I put things. And maybe you've got a business there, maybe you've got a car on the list. What would you put on this list? If you were to be brutally honest, and you had to list 1 to 10 on the things you love, what would you put on that list? In what order? Because putting it in order is a bit like, Milan, and then. But what would you put? And maybe there are times where that list looks a little bit different. I'll show you in a moment. But how do I love him more? Where does God fit on this list? Where would he be? And I know in the beginning of the year, Mike Murray spoke about seeking first the kingdom of God. And he didn't put it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He put a wheel. And at the spoke, the middle of the wheel, he had God. And then you had all these spokes. And maybe God is at the center. And then I've got Milan, Josh and Sam, my friends, my family, as a way of describing love. But how do we get to that place where this greatest command says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, strength? How do we get him to the top of that list? And what does a life look like that loves God more than any other love? And if, as I said, if we were to be honest, maybe I am high up on that list. Maybe there are things that I love. Maybe it's a phone, or maybe it's something. And maybe God is below my furry animals or my children or my exercise isn't on that list. It's I can't think about exercise for another 2 weeks, so I'm just leaving it off the list for now. But Jesus challenges our love. And I want to talk about our love. And in this passage in Mark, he quotes a passage from Deuteronomy 6 verse 4. And this is known as the Shema. And if anyone, If anyone understands what the Shema is, if you remember what Gavin said, this is a prayer. It's not just a command, but the Jews would also pray this twice a day. I think it's the first prayer that some of the Jewish children were taught. And Shema means listen and obey. So it's not just having words come into your ears, but it talks about listen and obey. So it starts off by saying, hear, O Israel, and here is the Shema. Don't just hear the words I'm saying, listen and obey, O Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Now, why is it that we've got a Lord in capital letters? What is the difference between L-O-R-D in capital and normal L-O-R-D in small letters, like the Master, Lord? Why does your Bible have capital letters for Lord? Does anyone know? Well, this is the divine name of God being used. So when God appeared to Moses at the burning bush, Moses asked, what is your name? And who knows what God replied? I am who I am, Yahweh. So even the Jews, this was such a sacred name, they would take the vowels out and they would use, and that's how they would write Yahweh. But when we talk about this capital letter L-O-R-D, we're talking about this name Yahweh. And he says, the Lord. You are to love the Lord. You are to love Yahweh, your God. And it's an amazing thing to actually name God as a name, not just this nameless God. So the reason why I highlight this is because when you tell someone to love God with all your heart, people come up with their own ideas of who God is. So maybe I want to serve a God that doesn't send people to hell, that he has a heaven but he doesn't have a hell. Maybe I want to serve a God that is all love but not holy. Maybe I want to serve a God that is ... And unfortunately, we live in a time where people come up with their own ideas of who God is, because we like that. I want God to be who I want him to be. And here he says, I want you to love Yahweh. Yahweh is not whoever we want him to be. He is who he is. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is one. Love Yahweh your God with all your heart. He is the one who made promises to Abraham and appeared to Moses. He is the one who brought Israel out of Egypt and came down to Sinai in fire. He is the one who cut a covenant, making his people his own. And he spoke through prophets. And supremely, he is the one who has revealed himself through Jesus Christ. So he says, I want you to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Now, we can, in the service today, I was expressing my love for God. And in our English language, love can be quite limiting. So we say, I love God, but I walk over to the bar after church and I say, I love coffee. And actually, I'm saying, I want to consume this coffee for my own pleasure. And maybe we say this about our girlfriend or our boyfriend, and we say, I love you, but actually I want to consume you for my own pleasure. It's not a giving love. And we can throw the term love around often. And in this passage, we need to use the word agape to define what love is. That love is just not it's not just a feeling, but love is more than that. It is a decision of the will to act in light of a deep, abiding concern and affection for the object of our love. And if we were to spend more time talking about love, love when working properly is both emotion and will and affection and action. I'm going to say that again. Love when working properly is both emotion. Emotions are good, feelings are good, desires are good. But it's also an act of the will. It is also affection, and it is also action. And when the Bible places loving God in the context of a command, it becomes that galvanizing force, not only for how we feel about God, but inspires our thoughts about him and also stimulates our desires for him, which can be in areas of the soul and the body. So what is the heart when the Hebrew writers say, love the Lord your God with all your heart? Well, the heart was that center inner being. It was that cockpit of our lives, that inner self, that inner center of a person. A soul, the Hebrew word for soul is nephesh, and that spoke about your life. That was your whole physical existence. To love the Lord with your energy, all of your life, all of your talents. So he doesn't just say, I want you to love me with all your heart, your inside, your inner cockpit. He says, I also want you to love him with your physical bodies. The Greeks were very good at kind of compartmentalizing the different sections, your heart and your body and your soul. But actually, you don't just have a body, you are a body. You don't just have a soul, you are a soul. The Hebrew saw it as far more interlinked than maybe the Greek thinking, where it was far more separate. But you have the soul, which is your nephesh. And then he says, love the Lord with all your strength. What does it mean to love the Lord with all your strength? Not just to do with how much you can bench press or loving the Lord with your muscles. This word is the Hebrew word called me'ud. And me'ud is an adverb, which means very or much. So when you say, actually it's right in the beginning of the Bible where God creates and he says it is me'ud tov, and tov is good. So he says, you can be me'ud angry or me'ud happy, which means very or much. So how do you love the Lord with all your me'ud? which is your matchness. What is your matchness? What does it mean to love the Lord with your matchness? Well, it talks about your substance. It talks about your influence. It talks about your possessions. All that God has given you in this life. So he says, I don't just want you to love me with your inner cockpit, your heart, your thoughts, your desires. I also want you to love me with your soul, your body, your physical existence, your life. And then I want you to love me with all that you are, your influence, your mayud, your matchness that you have. So how are you doing when it comes to loving the Lord with all that you are? And I guess the areas that we struggle to love God in, and we say, oh, I love you in this area, but I struggle to love you in that area. Where are you in loving the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength? All that you are. What does a church look like that gets this right? And I wanted to just to briefly highlight some aspects of love. Firstly, we are to love God with an exclusive love. What I mean by exclusive love, I think God knows, firstly, that He's designed us to be lovers. If God is love, He's designed us to be lovers. And we don't always have a problem in loving, it's what we love. And it's also maybe the order of things that we love. And we love sin. We can all, I think, acknowledge that. We love things of this world. And when I talk about an exclusive love, I'll use Matthew 6, verse 27, where Jesus says, no one can serve two masters. You will either hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth. And we know the love of money, because we know in our heart we will be devoted to the one or we'll be devoted to the other. And He calls us to have an exclusive love for Him. A love that goes beyond any other love. He knows the hearts. He knows our hearts. And I want us to say, let love be the measure of our maturity. If we were to talk about spiritual maturity, let love be the measure of our maturity, our love for Him and our love for others. I want to trust that every year that I am loving God more. And I am not going to say that I am the perfect example of someone that loves the Lord with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my strength. And I'm far off from being the perfect example of what it means to love my neighbor as I love myself. But I want to trust that year on year, my love for Him and my love for others is growing. I want to trust that, I can love God with this exclusive love. And then it says we are to love God with a surpassing love. And this thing that Jesus says might be offensive to some of you. He says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life will lose it, and he who has lost his life for my sake will find it. And why this can be offensive is because people can sit and look at their children and say, God, there's nothing more I love than my child in this life. I don't love anything more than my child. And Jesus is saying your love for me needs to surpass your love that you have for your children, for your spouse, for the things of this world. And as I said, we don't have a problem loving. It's what we have. It may be loving God and loving others is on our list at 7 and 8. And Jesus desires that our love for Him is sitting at number 1. How do I reorder my loves? How do I love Him first and foremost? What I need to do differently? How do I get to this place where if I were to do this list that God would be sitting as the number 1 on who and what I love? Then it says we are to love God with an obedient love. And Jesus says in John 14, verse 15, what does he say? If you love me, you'll do what? You'll obey my commandments. And loving God and obeying God are inseparable. And I love how John puts it in 1 John 5, verse 1 to 3. He says this, anyone who believes that Jesus is the Christ has been born of God. And everyone who loves the Father loves whoever has been born of God. So there's the thing. If you say you love God, you've got to love your Christian brother or sister. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and we do what? Obey, or we keep his commandments. And his commandments are what? Not burdensome. I think our legalistic radar starts going when we start talking about doing and obeying commandments and doing things. I guess the term obey is not a popular term. I don't think we like the term to be obedient in the world that we live in now. And Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey me. You will obey my commandments. You will do what I ask you to do. Obedience to Jesus is easy when we agree with it. But obedience to Jesus when we don't understand it or we don't like it is a real test of obedience. Because then you have to get to that place where you say, God, I will obey because I trust you even though I don't fully understand. Obedience is easy when it's what I think should happen. And what is it that you are struggling to be obedient with? To follow after our Rabbi, our Jesus, in the life that he's called us to live. And I find it so amazing when he says, and his commandments are not burdensome. Because why? When our love for God is strong, then doing and behaving the way he calls us to behave becomes far more natural because it's an overflow of our love for him. But when it's about doing and behaving a certain way, see, I don't want to raise Pharisees and Sadducees because they were very good at doing and keeping to the law, but they missed the love part. And I don't want to overemphasize the doing. I want the doing to be an overflow of our love for him. Because you know what, if my love for him is strong and in such a good place, forgiving someone that offends me becomes more natural and quicker, right? Where if my love for God is not in a good place and someone offends me, my natural thing is going to be, we got a problem here and this problem is going to be around for a long time. So how do we fall more in love? How do we grow that love? And then that obedience that flows from that. Eugene Peterson, his book that I have that I've been reading, talks about a long road of obedience. These daily small acts of obedience. I live a certain way because I love Jesus. And every day looks like a long road of obedience. And yes, there are times where my affection for him isn't where I want it to be. I think C.S. Lewis spoke about the peaks and the troughs of our love. Unfortunately, my love isn't just this every year, every day. My love seems to do this. Something happens, or we have a year of COVID and maybe our love is in a trough at the moment. But I want to trust that God can, in this post-pandemic church, in a church that is going to look at what a new normal is going to be, can we be described as a church that is passionately in love with Jesus? Can my life be described as a person that loves God with all of my inner self, my body, and every resource and influence that I have in this world with people, my talents, my gifts? See, we love God with all of our heart when we love him exclusively, him and him alone. We love God with all of our soul when we find satisfaction in him more than any other person or thing. And we love God with all of our mind when we make decisions to obey his commands, when we think his thoughts, when we love him in our thinking. And we love God with all of our strength, our muchness, when we persevere in the face of of trials. I want to close off by saying this Shema, this listen and obey, is going to be my challenge to you today. How are you going to reorder your loves? How are you going to prioritize loving the Lord with all of your heart? How are you going to behave differently? What are you going to do differently that will help stir an affection and a desire to love God? As I started off by saying, in some relationships, a successful relationship requires falling in love multiple times. And I want to say, as a church, we need to keep falling in love again with Jesus. You know, we can be so divisive at the moment with, should we take a vaccine? Shouldn't we take a vaccine? I feel like there's so many dividing things in our lives. Can we all agree on this one thing? That God has called us to love Him with all of our hearts, mind, soul, and strength. And if that can be the driving thing, the driving force of what we do and why we do it, everything we do should stem from this Shema, to love Him with all of our beings. Everything we do when we gather, when we get together, when we meet in homes, when we serve our communities, when we go and pray, whatever we do. So here is my challenge. Milan gave you a practical thing to do. This is my challenge for you this week. What changes, I want you to think about this question. What changes can I make in my life that will allow me to grow in my love for God? What relationship with my phone or my TV or my person or the way I structure my day and my time, what can I do? What changes can I make that will allow me to grow in my love for God? And then I want you to pray the Shema once a day. Let's get radical, twice a day. How about the moment you wake up and the moment you go to sleep? I want you to pray this simple prayer. Holy Spirit, help me to love Jesus with all of my heart, with all of my soul, and with all of my strength today. I want you to be conscious of loving Him and loving our neighbor and loving those around us. Let that be your first prayer you pray, or that last thing you pray when you go to sleep, and that first thing when you wake up. Before you start scrolling through social media, say, Jesus, Holy Spirit, help me to love God with all of me. I'm going to invite the worship team up as we just spend time in His presence and just reflect on some of the things that I've said today. I'm not just looking for passion. I'm looking for obedience. I'm not just looking for passionate worshipers as obviously something that I desire to see when we gather, that we worship Him with passion. I'm not just looking to stir passion. I'm looking for followers of Christ that will lay down their lives and follow Him with everything you have. And you will not allow the things of this world, the loves of this world, to get anywhere close to the love that you have for Him. And if I were to do some marriage counseling with someone that says, you know what, we've kind of fallen out of love in our relationship, I would say, well, this week, it's not going to be better at the end of this week, but there's some things you can do. Why don't you shave tomorrow, maybe get a haircut, maybe think about what you wear, and find some nice things to do for your wife. Maybe say some nice things, buy her a gift, go on a date, pursue her again. And at the end of the week, it's not going to be where you want it to be. Who knows, it doesn't take a week to get a marriage back. But there are things you can do in that week to get you to where you want to go. I want to say this, as a church and as a people, next Sunday, we're not going to be where we want to be when it comes to loving the Lord with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. But we can be a little bit closer by the way we have behaved, some of the things we've done, time we've spent with Him, maybe less of something and more of Him. And at the end of the week, we can say, God, we are doing small steps of obedience because we love You. We want to fall more in love with You. we want to reprioritize and reorder our loves, and we want our love to grow.